He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghost. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghost. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghost. Okay. That's pretty good. Hello and welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
This week we conclude our coverage of Stephen King's 1986 horror epic, It. Now let's fly into the macroverse. We did it. Cheers, man. Last part.
We made it through. Congrats. I can't believe we made it through this huge 1,000-page book. What an undertaking for our first podcast.
Well, it's my second time too. But yeah, we will be seeing this movie to really conclude our coverage of the material. But this is the part 5, the final section for this book. All right, let's launch into it. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, so part 5 begins with the adults making, breaking for the night from the library. All their hands begin to spontaneously bleed where the old cuts were. And they have this kind of, power moment where, the typewriter starts typing, he thrusts his fist against the post, and energy's in the room, and they think about the ritual. And they say they start to remember everything, but, of course, we learn that they're not really remembering quite everything. They just keep feeling like they're remembering everything, but then there's lots of bits and pieces they still get later. Bill feels like he's falling in love with Bev again, and Bev and Bill embrace, and she admits to hating her father. And as she's thinking about her father, we go into the first flashback section. So Bev is thinking about in 1958. She is coming home, and her father has been waiting for her. And she realizes he's been to the Barrens because he's tracked a very specific kind of mud into the house. And he's this is a moment where it's described as it fills the hollow places in people, is an exact quote from the book. And essentially, it takes people who have these, as we've talked about many times, who have a violent impulse, and it turns it up. And it's doing this with her father in this moment. He's kind of got this glassy stare, and it's not to say that he doesn't have these thoughts, but it's definitely getting amped up through it.
Yeah, and it goes beyond a violent nature with Bev's dad, because he had been a violent to her, but I don't think that there was really any situations besides this where he had been this outwardly sexually abusive towards her. He was it was aggressive, and I was fearful for Bev in this situation, because I was all right, well, this is this crazy guy who's obviously been beating her whole childhood, but he's amped up to 11 because of Pennywise, and it's just taking it to a place where she could be in emotional trauma situations for the rest of her life because of this.
Yeah, so he's obsessed with finding out if she's been having sex. And he's demanding to check her and all this gross stuff. And she doesn't even understand what he's talking about, but she knows that he considers it the worst thing she could possibly do. And she has denying it, and then he kind of chases after her, and she literally runs out of the house, and he's trying to beat her and do gross things to her, and he runs after her into the street, and we start to see more proof of townsfolk who are kind of turning blind eyes to things. And so a lot of people don't react the way they probably should, and he He chases after her. She jumps under like a dumpster truck thing, crawls under it, gets all dirty and covered in like garbage smell. He crawls after her. They both kind of get cut up. She keeps running, gets away, like hides in a cemetery, I think it was. And as she's hiding, she sees her father kind of go by, and he can't find her.
So there's like a neighbor who is like reading the paper, and when Bev runs out of the house with her dad after her, and he's screaming like sexually abusive things at her down the road, some of the neighbors react negatively, like, oh, there's something bad going on. But there is one neighbor who like is sitting in a lawn chair out front, and he's like reading a newspaper, and when this happens, he literally just gets up and walks inside like nothing happened. So it's just like kind of, I don't know if it's part of like its ritual that once it's begun for a cycle, that like he gets influence over the city, and slowly they just become more and more like apathetic and just don't care about what's happening to a little girl who's potentially going to be raped and like beat by her father in the streets in public.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about how pervasive his influence is, or its influence is, and we see that that's on display here for sure. I did want to say here, I think this scene is a little bit of really a lot of Bev's scenes up till now, but this scene in particular, I think is also kind of key when we're going to discuss the controversial scene later. I don't want to get into it too much, but I just want to like put a pin in this. So I think this is an important scene here to kind of understanding some of what goes on later. Okay, so she decides to go to the hideout. And as she's on her way to the hideout, hoping to meet with the Losers Club, the bullies kind of fall in behind her and start chasing her. And we see Henry draw a switchblade, and she can like feel something behind her. And then we jump back to 1985, and we have Mike Hanlon similarly feeling like he's being watched, and he's in the library, and he's flipping through his notebook, and he hears a footstep. He grabs a letter opener for self-defense, and then he sees someone approaching through the glass hallway, and it's Henry Bowers. And he starts throwing his old taunts at him, like racial epithets and so forth. And Henry Bowers asks him if he ever hears voices from the moon. And he says that the voice in the moon told him where to look to find his old switchblade. And he has that now. And he lunges at Mike. They have this battle. Henry stabs Mike's leg. Mike gets a few good stabs on him. And then during the fight, Stan's head pops up from behind the table like it's like in a Jack-in-the-Box. In this really kind of gruesome madhouse kind of way. And then finally Mike embeds the letter opener in Henry Bowers' belly, and Henry has to kind of run away, and both of them are left just bleeding and badly wounded. Mike actually probably worse because he's gotten stabbed in the leg, possibly like a femoral artery, we hear. And it's not clear whether or not he's even going to be able to survive. And he picks up the phone, and he's trying to like call for help, but on the other end he only hears Pennywise, and Pennywise taunting him. And he kind of says, like, in case anyone can hear me, I'm not being allowed to hear you, but come here and help me. And so we don't know if he even is able to call for help.
When the scene started and Henry showed up, I was like, oh, maybe this is like the beginning of my theory coming to fruition. We're going to see.
Oh, that's right. You thought maybe a Henry Bowers redemption arc?
Yeah, I thought there might be a redemption arc coming, and then he stabbed him in his femoral artery, and I was like, well, fuck Henry Bowers. He totally ruined my theory. Yeah, I mean, they got into this crazy battle, and Mike basically is like, I think I'm going to die. And Henry gets totally wrecked, too, in the stomach area. He gets stabbed a whole bunch of times by Mike. But the part that I liked the most about this was when he picked up the phone. Mike picked up the phone to call for help. And Pennywise came on the line and was, like, messing with him and saying, like, you're dead, you're going to die. And Mike is just, like, so smart. And he's, like, done all the research. And he's level-headed. And he's just, like, if you can hear me on the other line, I can't hear you. But come to the library and save me because I'm badly injured and all this stuff. And I thought that was awesome. That he's just, like, so cunning. He's figured it out.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing the adults... I mean, the kids have it at this point, too. But they've figured out, like, some of his tricks. And have become a little bit... not immune, but resistant to their effects. Otherwise, they would not survive at all. So then we hop back to 1958. I'm going to try as much as possible to keep the years because there's a lot of jumping back and forth, and it can get disorienting sometimes. So back in 1958, Henry Bowers catches up to Bev, grabs her ponytail, and basically is kind of assaulting her when this old woman drives up in a car and starts yelling. Henry Bowers is basically like gone so crazy he doesn't give a fuck, and he runs at the car and like starts like kicking it and stuff, and the old woman like drives away basically in terror of what Henry's going to do. And he's been dragging Bev along with him. And then she takes the opportunity to get a kick him in the balls. And then she spits on him and then runs. And then Henry Bowers chases after her.
Bev can't catch a break in this whole section. She's got her dad coming at her. She's got Henry coming at her. I mean, it's just nonstop. And this section, I was literally like, why is no one else there to help her? Why doesn't anybody else show up? And then eventually
whenever they're on their own away from the rest of the Losers Club, they feel really vulnerable, right? I felt the same way about like Mike in the library when he's just on by himself and you're like, where's everybody else?
Yeah, they've got to stay together. I don't know how they didn't learn that from the first round with Pennywise when they were kids.
Next up we're back in 1985, and it's Bill and Bev walking hand in hand. And this is kind of like a romantic series here where they go to the hotel room and he keeps thinking like, I'm going to cheat on my wife. And he's kind of in denial about it, but also kind of like realizing it's going to happen. They kind of start making out. She admits that Tom is a lot like her father, and she can see it clearly now that she can remember it. And I had like, I wanted to segue to a thought I had about this book in general, in that it feels to me like all of the characters have been denied personal growth that they went through as children because of this whole memory thing. And the fact that they can't remember everything that happened as kids, like, it's really kind of tragic because you feel like she wouldn't have been with Tom if she could remember what she went through as a kid. But because she forgot that, she was denied that like personal growth. So I don't know, it adds like a layer of tragedy to it to me.
I agree. I mean, with what happens later on, like certain characters would act differently after that. And because they don't, they kind of fall into the same character traits that they have before it.
Well, Eddie is another example, right?
Exactly. Eddie remains this like hypochondriac type person even after what they go through, which doesn't really make that much sense.
Yeah. Well, okay, then they make Sweet Sweet Love.
They definitely do. See, I just like didn't really even want them to get together. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you felt about, I mean, like, I feel like just because I knew it was coming, but like, I don't know, I guess I do still feel, it feels a little bit like throughout this whole book, it feels a little weird because it seems like Ben and her are the ones that should be more destined to be with each other, but it's also kind of true to life in that it doesn't always work out the way maybe that it seems like it should be. I don't know. Is that why you felt weird about it?
I just don't think I was ever like rooting for it to happen. Like, I feel like there might be people who like read it and like kind of buy into it in a way. And like, it's obviously there's the fact that he's cheating on his wife, which is super fucked up. But it's like, I didn't even really see them other than like lusting for each other. Like, I didn't really see it. You know what I mean? I just think that they wanted each other, not that they actually loved each other in the way that they kind of make it seem like they do.
Well, and I think in something I'm going to bring up again later, I think it is also a moment of Bev. Although this scene's from Bill's point of view, she is kind of the like one who puts a lot of this into motion. It felt like she was kind of coming on to Bill more than the other way around, and he was reciprocating. And so to me, it felt like another scene of her like having her own agency with her sexuality, and something that she doesn't have with Tom and with her father, who's been very guarded of like who she is attracted to and who she can be physical with. And so I think maybe this has something to do with what happens later too. Like, it can be another stepping stone in that direction. So something to remember when we get to that.
I had a question for you about this part. We spoke before about how Stephen King is kind of similar to the character of Bill. Yeah. I was just wondering, like, you know, how he's married a movie star and all of these things.
Yeah.
How many conversations do you think he and his wife have had about this whole situation here?
I wasn't going that route, but that's pretty funny to think about. Sure.
I mean, the way he writes it, you're like, is this Stephen King like sexual fantasies? Like, what's going on here? Like, because he kind of made it himself.
I do feel like people sometimes like to throw around like Mary Sue's accusations and stuff, and you can almost see Bill as that in this book. I don't think he is, but I think it's fair to say if like some other author is being accused of it for a different kind of character, I think it's fair to look at Bill this way, because he does. I mean, he does, like, he gets the girl, but then he also gets the movie star, and he gets everything, really.
I don't think that I'm just mentioning it because we talked about it before, how they're similar. I don't think that he's actually like a surrogate for Stephen King. I think it's just literally him being like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to think about, for sure. I mean, you can't look over the fact that he is a horror writer. You know what I mean? Like, who has had a similar career to Stephen King himself, and he's the main character, and he's really the main protagonist, and he's kind of, he's the one who has all the power ultimately. Okay, so let's move on. Now they are running from Henry Bowers into the Barrens. This is in 1958. Bev arrives at the hideout, jumps in with Ben, and they hide in the dark, watching the outlines of bullies through like the slit in the trapdoor. And they're thumping around overhead, and there's kind of some tense moments. And then they both start fighting laughter as they're both like kind of oddly just like cracking up about the whole situation. And then Belch finally leaves, and they both start laughing. And then in that moment, Bev abruptly thanks Ben for the haiku, because she's like kind of put two and two together and figured out that it was him. And he's super embarrassed about it, but admits to loving her. And then she admits that she likes Bill, but she says that she likes him too. And then she goes on to tell him how crazy Henry was acting, and how she thinks he's even crazier than he's been before. And then that maybe it is using him. And that with it influencing him, that he actually could kill them. And this scene ends with them coming out of the hideout and heading to go find the rest of the Losers Club, where they think they might be.
Ben and Bev's relationship is like a big part of this book, and I think this scene here is like one of the major pieces of the puzzle that leads to kind of what happens later, like them being in this small space, like huddled together, and like fighting laughter in this like dangerous situation. It's kind of just like a character, character
like bonding
moment for bonding. That's a good way to say it. They're just bonding, like a good character bonding scene. And at first when they were laughing, I was like, why are they laughing? I don't understand it at all. And then for some reason I started laughing too, because I genuinely found it funny that like they were down there like laughing, because this kid's like sitting on top of the trapdoor and it's like creaking like it's gonna break. And then he's like saying a bunch of dumb stuff because he's not the smartest guy.
Yeah, he's like talking to himself.
He's talking to himself, saying some funny stuff, and then he just starts like ripping farts and stuff, and he's just like, they're just like down there.
Of course you're gonna laugh.
Yeah, so they're just like stifling laughter in like the face of danger. It was just a cool scene. They had a nice bonding time together.
Okay, so then next we jump to Henry Bowers back in 1985. He's outside the library, kind of hiding from a police car that drives by. He's hiding in a ditch, and he's thinking about how when the head popped up from behind the desk in the library, he saw Victor's head on it. We learn, and then he hears the ambulance coming, and he kind of gets this like, oh shit, maybe Mike's like called them, and he's gonna end up surviving. But then he keeps like telling himself, no way, I totally, like, I got him good. He's gonna die. He thinks about how, in his words, it came from the sky and came from the spaces between the stars. And he kind of thinks about, like the voice from the moon and all this stuff. And then he kind of launches into another memory from 1958 where he's chasing after Bev and looking for her, and she kind of just disappeared. So back in 1958, Henry Bowers... it's in his POV now, and we hear that he's sitting there and he feels like his balls are swelling up from getting kicked, and he's looking around for Bev, and he hears this voice from the pumping station that tells him to wait and watch, in a very creepy Pennywise voice. And so he does. He decides that's his plan. They're gonna wait, and they're gonna be patient, and they're gonna, because he knows that eventually they're gonna like lead him to the rest of them. He wants to get all of them. And then he starts having this memory of this morning where he got this switchblade that came to him in a box that was covered in balloons. And I noted that the return address said Mr. Robert Gray, Derry, Maine, on this package he got that contained the switchblade, which we know is one of its aliases, which is still pretty mysterious. So then we learned that as soon as he got the switchblade, he went back inside his house and put it up to his father's sleeping throat and like pulled the trigger and basically murdered his father. And then went out to find the losers, with the moon telling him, kill them all. All right, so next up we got Henry back in 1985, and he's laying in the ditch, and a car shows up, and it tells him he's sent a ride. And he realizes it's the car his father always wanted, and he comes up and he gets inside, and Belch Huggins is in the driver's seat, and he's like zombified, rotting, dead. And Henry grabs some wine from the glove compartment, drinks it, and he thinks about how a dead boy is driving this car, and he doesn't know how that can be true. And then he tries to like explain to him why he couldn't save him. And we hear some about how the Frankenstein's monster ripped Vic's head off, and that Henry ran and got lost, and then eventually kind of made his way out. And he knows that Belch was killed by the monster too. And then Belch drives Henry to the hotel. Basically tells him to shut up and go get them. And then Pennywise gives him like a little memo that's got all of their room numbers written on it, all the people who are at the hotel.
It's crazy to me that Pennywise has the power to make Henry basically all-knowing. He can be like, all right, here's your switchblade from when you were a kid. Here's some car that comes to pick you up. Like, a car had to have come to pick him up.
Yeah, the car thing is weird because I don't feel like we ever get a good explanation for what's really happening there. The only thing is that like he actually manifests these. Like they're not illusions in the sense that they don't have any real presence, because they do. So somehow he is able to use Henry's fear to actually make a working car that was driven by a zombie. So, right. I mean, that's the only explanation, right?
Yeah. I mean, because he got there. He got to the hotel. So he got a ride. He got his childhood switchblade that he killed a bunch of people with, or killed his dad with at least. And then he knows exactly where all the Losers Club is. So it's like such a deadly combination, because Henry doesn't, like, he's so out of his mind, and he's got the power of Pennywise behind him.
Oh, so I should say Henry goes up to Eddie's room, decides he's going to go there first, and knocks on the door and announces that he's the bellboy and that he's got a message from Eddie's wife. And then, just as Eddie's opening the door, we kind of go back in time. And now we're in 1958, and Eddie, Stan, and Richie are all together. And then Bill and Mike come along on their bikes, and together they head down towards the Barrens, and they encounter Ben and Bev. And, Bev's all messed up and kind of fills them in on what's been going on with Henry. And then they all go down to the Kenduskeag, and Eddie begins to feel apprehensive, as if the town seems ready for a showdown. It's like quiet, weirdly, and the light seems different. And then Eddie feels like someone is watching him. So then it jumps right back to 1985. Eddie opens the door to Henry Bowers, and Henry Bowers stabs in, but Eddie basically on reflex like slams the door into the knife. I think Henry like throws Eddie, breaks his arm. Eddie gets this bottle, breaks it open, cuts Henry's face with it, slashes open his eye, and then they exchange some more blows. And then finally Eddie falls to the ground with like the broken end of the bottle pointing upward, and Henry falls on top of it and impales himself on the bottle. And then Henry gets up, and he sees Eddie gets up and he sees Henry like on the ground gurgling, and this kind of like wondering if he's going to die or not, and then he does, essentially. And so he calls over to Bill's room and says he just killed Henry Bowers.
I didn't expect Eddie to kill Henry Bowers, and I also didn't really expect Henry Bowers to die, and it was kind of just like not as climactic as I expected.
You didn't expect him to die here or at all?
Oh, I mean, I expected him to die. I didn't expect him to die here.
Okay, so it seemed like an early death.
Yeah, I figured he was gonna make it to the sewers. Like I figured he was gonna make it a little further. I just didn't expect Eddie to kind of like kill him with a bottle after I don't know. I felt like every single one of the Losers Club had a gripe against Henry, so like all of them may have been involved in defeating him, but they weren't. It was kind of just like Eddie got him.
Yeah, well, Mike softened him up, as Eddie even says.
That's true.
All right, so now we're back in 1958, and we see Bill and Eddie arriving at the hideout, and the whole Losers Club really. And Bill says he can feel that the bullies are watching them, but he doesn't understand why they haven't come out yet. And then he kind of has this feeling like they're all pawns being set against each other in some huge game. And he wants to end the cycle. And he also knows that like the townsfolk are just going to let this happen, and that we get this first time where he says Derry is it. They're essentially one and the same, and that no one will help them or even see if they were in need of help. And so they have no choice but to go down into the sewers and face it, essentially. As they're like kind of deciding to do this, the bullies start throwing rocks at them from the woods and chase them to the pumping station as they're getting pelted with rocks. And Ben knows where to go, so he leads them to it. And then they climb down into the pumping station, and Bill carries Eddie on his back because Eddie's arm is broken.
I like that the kids finally caught on to the fact that like nobody's really that willing to help them because of its influence. Like they're kind of realizing that he doesn't necessarily do it on his own. He either uses your fear or your influence or something like that, rather than actually out and out just coming and murdering people, which he does do sometimes, but
yeah,
he likes to manipulate.
Well, and they know that they don't have the cavalry isn't coming for them. Like they have no help because he won't let the town help them. It's really like they're on their own. In this moment, they kind of really realize that. So yeah, they go down into the pumping station. Richie's shouting, making chicken noises at Henry and the bullies, and he even bites Henry's ankle when Henry starts to come down. And then Henry kind of has this moment where he looks down and sees them all waiting and decides he doesn't want any of that. So he goes back up and then kind of starts throwing down rocks. And then they decide that now's the time. They got to head down into the sewers and have the battle with it itself. And they head deeper in.
It was good to see Henry for the coward that he was. He wouldn't go in to fight them like on his own. He's not courageous enough. He realized that he was outnumbered, so he's just like, I'll just wait out here and nickel and dime him with some rocks.
Yeah, I mean, he does end up coming in, but it's only once like the way is safe, right? Then he goes down to chase after him. He's got to have his backup with him, essentially. Yeah. So next up, we get we flash back to 1985, and we get Tom Rogan, and he's in his hotel room, and he's having this dream about killing his father, even though we learned that his father had committed suicide. So this isn't how his father dies. So it's this weird thing that's about to happen again with Audra, and that he's dreaming that he is Henry Bowers, and that he's chasing after the losers in 1958. And he can feel their anger, and he can think about how he wants to kill them, and how these moon balloons, as he calls them, led the way so that he could chase after them. And then in the dream, he sees the Victor and Belch dead, and he wakes up screaming. And then in his hotel room, he hears Pennywise talking to him, basically from the bathroom. And a balloon shows up with an arrow pointing toward the door, glowing with light. And then we learn that, at the end, it says it explains everything to Tom, and tells him all about the Losers Club, I guess.
I didn't realize that Tom and Henry were just like these interchangeable evil pawns that Pennywise like. I thought that they would be used similarly, but it was literally like in the present day with the adult Losers Club, Henry dies, and then almost immediately Tom is like activated, and it's like, all right, time to bring in Tom to take over what Henry couldn't finish.
Yeah, but I mean, he also doesn't really do that. I kind of was thinking he was going to like try and kill them, but I mean, this is really the last section where we hear about him in Audra's section, but this is really Tom's last bit here. And then to me, if you said the Henry Bauer stuff was anticlimactic, I thought the Tom stuff was, because I was expecting some sort of huge throwdown between him and Bev, but he never really has that. And he's kind of killed off screen or off page.
Yeah, I definitely expected that too. I expected some sort of showdown, and even just now when you said that, I kind of had forgotten that this is Tom's like last little bit here. Like I was like he literally just kidnaps Audra, and that's the
I mean, the kidnapping Audra thing is big because it seems like she is essentially killed by this, and it's the thing that makes Bill scared later, and so it is like a important thing for what it is trying to do. So I guess you can defend it in that way, but it seemed a little odd to me to have his character basically disappear after this section.
I definitely thought he was going to be more of an obstacle for them.
All right, so we get Audra, and her section kind of mirrors Tom's, and in some ways she's also dreaming, and she has this kinship with Bev, and she literally thinks about being Bev down in the sewers, and then she wakes up again, kind of just like Tom did, disoriented, and she starts hearing Pennywise talking in her hotel room, and she thinks, oh, I must just be imagining things, and she tries to call over to where Bill is staying, but he doesn't pick up, and she kind of has this moment of like, oh, he's cheating on me, and then the voice speaks again from the bathroom, and the TV turns on, and she sees the dancing clown on the TV, and she runs out into the hallway, and basically to get away, like these hands kind of come out from underneath the doorway and scare her, and she runs all the way out into the parking lot, trying to find her keys in her purse to get in her car, and her section ends with Tom's hand basically clamping down on her shoulder, and that's really the last time we see Tom, other than his dead body later. So Bill goes up to Eddie's room, because he's gotten the call from Eddie, and he finds out that Eddie's arm is broken again, which I think it's the same arm, and it's this another moment of this similarity between the past and future, or past and present. And Henry Bowers is dead. They talk about how the town will make sure they die if they try and go to the hospital, and basically that they can't. And they're all kind of talking again, remembering and also intuiting that like the town can't help them now as it didn't in the past. And they say they got to go down to the sewers and do this thing. But Bev decides to call the library to try and check for Mike. And that's when she speaks to the cop and learns that Mike is in the hospital. And then Richie ends up calling the hospital, faking like he's a reporter to get information. They learn that Mike is in serious condition now after having been attacked by Henry. And that's when they finally say, all right, we got to go down to the sewers.
Yeah, I kind of expected when they found out that he was in the hospital that they were going to go to the hospital. But they were like, we have to get this done now. Because I was always just under the impression that like they needed all of them, or as many of them as they could get together, because the numbers for some reason affected Pennywise in a much larger way.
Yeah, so they all hop in Richie's limo, drive down to the Barrens, and they hear Pennywise on the radio, basically taunting them. And then they hear Georgie's voice, and he's accusing Bill for letting it kill him. And that seems to be something that continues to get to Bill, is that when he hears his little brother's voice kind of being accusatory, he always has this like haunted look on his face. Yeah, so they park in the Barrens, get out and head down into down to the Kunduskig, and once again they follow Ben, and they get to the pumping station, and that's when Bill finds the purse that he recognizes as Audra's purse, and he even like upturns it and finds her ID in there, and that's his like oh shit moment, because he thought she was all the way back in England and safe. And now he knows that she's here and that it has her.
And he falters. He is basically like out of commission for a second. The rest of the club has to come together and like be like, come on, we got to push through it. It'll either find her or whatever's like going on here. We'll figure it out. It's probably just it playing a trick on you.
Yeah, but I mean, so this is kind of, if you want to defend what happens with Tom, it's that Tom is essential in making this happen, and this is the thing that unsettles and throws Bill off the most and gives it kind of the best chance to win. So he is pretty influential in that way, I guess. So next up, we get It's first chapter. And first off, just like, did it surprise, like, how much did it surprise you? What'd you think of the fact that we were basically getting It's perspective?
I was so surprised. I was shocked. I loved it because we were getting this perspective from this like ancient entity being thing, and he was like thinking of the turtle, and he's like thinking about how that old bastard died a long time ago, and how like it was really cool. I liked it, and the way that he thought about the Losers Club, and the way that he felt fear and pain for the first time when they were kids.
So it says that before the universe there was only two things: itself and the turtle who vomited the universe out whole. And that becomes a recurring thing where basically the turtle like had a stomach ache and vomited, and that's like the universe. And then so it says that it came here because Earth has this like quality of imagination that can really feed it, and so it comes here and it eats. And there's a lot of talk about the deadlights, and they're very hard to pin down exactly what they are. But it says that the deadlights are its eyes, and that it, something new happened when it felt fear. Calls the turtle an old stupid thing. And then it says these children did something hurting it, basically at the house on Niebalt Street when it got hit with the silver. And that's when it felt fear for the first time in its long life. And this is where we first hear about the macroverse. And we learned that there is a law that all things must abide by the rules of the form they take. Apparently, is a rule in the macroverse. So because of that, he knows that when he takes the form of this like werewolf, he had that kind of because he had to obey those rules, he had a vulnerability. And so then he feels anger for the first time, or it feels anger for the first time, and it wants to kill these children. And it's wondering how it's even possible that they could have hurt it. And then we get this thought where it says it wonders if there was another in addition to the turtle in itself. And then it says when they get here, it would cast them shrieking and insane into the deadlights. So what do you make of any of? I mean, it's very opaque, but like, can you try and like parse any of that, at least for yourself, like what you thought it was talking about?
I mean, it was talking about another entity, and like I have to wonder if this was like King's way of like bringing religion into it, bringing like the omnipotent like being, like bringing in like a god.
But it's very, I mean, if it is there, it's very distant, right? Like,
right. It's not like pointing to anything. It's just saying that there was something that was potentially older and that created the turtle. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe that's what that is, because I was expecting it to pop back up again, for them to be like, there's another one. But and maybe it does, maybe kind of.
Well, we get another It section coming up here, but next up we get the group coming to a chamber with some pipes, and I think this is in 1958. This is another thing where like the times get so weird sometimes. And because they're all down in the sewers now, so it starts to get disorienting.
In both timelines.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of overlap, right? And so they choose the pipe that's full of shit and sewage, and they sense that they're headed towards it. And then Bill kind of falls out of a pipe abruptly, hits his head on the roof, and then they light up a match, and they see Patrick Hochstetter's dead body. And this is basically when we heard about it feeding on him. This is where he ultimately died. And they begin to hear screams from Henry and some of the other bullies that may be chasing after them still. What'd you think about seeing old Patrick again?
I thought it was cool. I definitely didn't think we were going to see him again. To see his body was probably, especially for Bev, was probably pretty interesting, like pretty crazy situation to see this kid that they all knew as a bully to just be like completely like. I mean, he looks disgusting, and like,
yeah, he'd been eaten and was rotting. I think rats had eaten his face and like all this stuff. So yeah, now we're back in 1985, and it's another It section. It says they have come again, 5 instead of 7, but 5 is another powerful number. And we hear that it has destroyed Audra's mind because she saw it for what it truly was, with all its glamours cast aside. It says that now her mind is with the Deadlights. Yeah, so this is the first where we hear about Audra and Tom, and it thinks about how it had Tom bring her, but then when Tom got there, essentially he dropped dead just from seeing the true face of it. It crisscrosses them in silk and feeds on fear. It's kind of waiting down in its lair for the Losers Club to come to it. It thinks about the previous battle that it escaped, and in the intervening time, it has made a plan. And it knows that as it gets older, as all the people get older, that their dreams grow smaller with time. And so it was always its plan to call them back. And it hoped that their power would be greatly diminished as adults. But it is upset because it still senses a great power in them. But it's still convinced that it's going to kill them, essentially, and it's going to feed on them all.
Yeah, I think it's that these characters, with the guidance of Mike, realized that like they needed to, there's certain things from their childhood that held like special meaning, and that they needed to kind of be kids still, and that's the power. Their power is kind of drawn from that idea. It's all very tough to pin down because they were powerful as kids because there were 7 of them, and they should be at a disadvantage as adults because there's only 5 of them, but yet they're still able to tap into this power. But they're definitely at a disadvantage, and it knows it because last time it was not prepared for what was coming. It was kind of caught off guard, and then now as adults, Pennywise has brought them back, and he is expecting them. He knows what's coming.
I do feel like all the drama shifts to the present day, because while we're still interested to know what happens with the children, we already know the outcome of that confrontation.
Yeah, maybe that's why King threw in that crazy scene for the kids.
Maybe
he needed something that people weren't
surprising
expecting as a kid.
Yeah. Back in 1985, the adults come out of the same pipe, and Bill sees they all see the remains of Patrick Hochstetter in 1985, and Bill finds Audra's wedding ring, and he again like kind of starts to freak out. And we jump back to 1958, and they all start to smell something that kind of activates personalized fears again. It smells different for each of them, but it's all like the smell of it. And they kind of keep going deeper and deeper, and they start to think about how they're going deep below town, and they can still hear Henry calling after them. And then all of a sudden, in the dark, the eye basically shows up from Richie's, fear when he was sitting at the statue. This eye from like an old movie, and it's got tentacles, and it's sliding towards them in the dark, and it tries to take Bill. And this is the Eddie kind of decides that his aspirator is going to shoot acid and believes it, and then shoots his aspirator at the eye, basically spraying it with acid, and it really hurts it, and they all kind of punch it and kick it. And really it's not until Richie comes up and punches it too, because he's the one who it was like his personalized fear, and when he stands up to it, it really defeats it, and basically it kind of crawls off.
I think this is Eddie taking on the role of like, he's like their paladin at this point. He's like he's like stepping up in so many ways, and I mean, it's awesome. He just like takes it upon himself to decide that his aspirator can spray acid. So now he's like basically they all have superpowers now, is what I'm trying to say. if they really leaned into it, they could make anything happen, is what this shows. As far as, I guess, towards it in confrontation with it. They could make virtually anything happen.
Yeah, as long as they believe it, right? So next up, they come into a huge chamber lit by a mysterious light. And the bird, Mike's bird, comes flying out of the shadows, biting at Eddie. And Mike cuts it with a buck knife. And then the bird like slashes him, knocks away the blade. And then Stan begins to use his bird book knowledge to drive away the bird by saying he doesn't believe that it even exists. That it kind of lists all these other birds that do exist and says you don't exist. And eventually drives the bird off. So that's Stan's moment to shine. And he really he defeats this bird. And then they continue on, and here they find the child-sized door with child bones laying in front of it, and they each see a different symbol, each catered to them, and they go through this child-sized door into the layer of it.
So the child-sized door is like a portal, kind of, also, right? It's like,
yeah, maybe. I mean, it's unclear.
It's like kind of, and like, what did you make of the symbols? Like, what did you like? Was it just one of those things where it's like kind of showing like its powers still?
Well, later the symbols are gone. So yeah, it's maybe the hideout. Yeah, it could be kind of like this extra dimensional space almost, and this is the entryway to it. And the symbols are some sort of mark of its, like, this is where its power is like at its most, because it seems like this is where it's like it's most condensed. It's its home. We already heard it say that it doesn't use glamours when it's in its home. So this is like kind of a different space, and this door is like a signifier of like something is different beyond this door. So in 1985, they're in the tunnels, and they kind of go. They're passing through these places where these things happened, and they recognize that they're in the same area where the eye attacked them back in the previous timeline. And this is when Bev realizes that she told Tom where she went. And this is like the first thought she has, that maybe Tom could be here. And maybe have something to do with Audra. And so then they remember about the door, and they get to it, and they can remember going through the door as children, but they can't remember what happened on the other side of it. And then they hear the noise of something coming towards them in the dark. And then we jump to Mike in the hospital. And, well, it's like Mike, but it's also really just like this macro look at the town. And like, we hear about the clock tower, how it doesn't chime at 5 a.m. at all. And a bunch of old timers kind of wake up feeling disquieted, and like something's like ominous and threatening. And this is we're going to get several sections coming up where it talks about stuff kind of going crazy in the town. And this is the first of that. And then it jumps back to the scene before where they had heard something coming in the dark, and it's George coming out of the dark, and it's accusing Bill, and Bill feels like he's losing his mind, and the horror of this really hits him in his guilt. And then they all chant the phrase. He thrusts his fist against the post
and still insists
he sees the ghost. Yeah, that's the one. And they basically drive Georgie away with that phrase. And Bill is kind of reduced to be like blubbering and saying he's sorry over and over again.
I didn't expect to see Georgie pop up again. So that was fun to get that kind of, because I feel like that's been even more so than like Audra or anything else that can affect Ben, or not Ben, but Bill, is Georgie. And it's that like unresolved thing throughout, that like this is the whole motivation behind why Bill wants to even kill it. And I mean, I said before, like early on, that this is the part that like stuck with me the most. So I kind of going in thought there would be more stuff relating to Georgie. And then there wasn't as much. So I kind of wasn't expecting to see him again. So seeing him again was like, it makes sense that he's reduced to a blubbering mess, and the whole crew has to come together to remotivate him and kind of get him back on track and push him forward.
Yeah. So then we get another Derry. I'm gonna call them Derry macro, sections, and it's this big rain starts coming down that wasn't supposed to happen today, according to all the forecasts. And we hear about a man getting electrocuted, and then sewer pipes start to reverse and explode. And literally, like, one woman gets her head cut off by a gear wheel from the old ironworks, comes flying out of the ground. And then we hear that another woman is sitting on a toilet when it explodes and kills her. Mike Hanlon wakes up in the hospital, and he remembers what happened with Henry, and he starts thinking about the others when this guy comes in with a syringe. Oh, and I think it was one of the It sections. I didn't mention it, but we had learned that It had this plan to send someone to kill Mike with this syringe. So this is something that we know It has kind of orchestrated. And so back in the sewers, these are the adults. They all feel like Mike is in danger, and Bill says, like, grab hands, and they all kind of grab hands, and then they quote unquote send Mike their power. And then back in the hospital, Mike feels this power surge, and he grabs a glass and he smashes it into the man's face, basically saving himself from getting injected with this whatever it was that was going to kill him.
So the Losers Club, like, they all join hands in a circle, and Bill is like saying, like, send him our power, and I was like, this isn't gonna work. And then they all feel something like leave their body, like some sort of like power that they send off to him. And then my first thought was, so Mike smashed like a doctor or like a guy. I don't think it was a doctor, it was just a random guy, right?
Yeah, no, it was like I think he was a nurse.
Okay, so it was a nurse. So Mike smashed a nurse in the face with a glass pitcher or something. Who are they gonna side with? The patient who smashed a nurse in the face with a glass pitcher? Like he's gonna be in trouble for that, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe because like I assume the syringe is full of something that maybe that person shouldn't have had. And so, like, if the thing that he was worried about is literally laying on the ground, like, he was gonna stab me with that thing.
That's true.
And he's like I don't know. But yeah, that's a good point. But we also know that, like, the police are all fucked up in Derry anyway.
Yeah,
so
technically everyone is. So they would probably just not even care. They would be like, whatever, he smashed him in the face.
So they all back in the sewers. They realize that Mike's okay. That whatever they did, they think it worked. And so they come across the door again now as adults. And they all see different symbols, and they see this green light glowing from underneath it. And they decide to go in, and they have to crawl to go inside. And then this is the big reveal of they remember it simultaneously as they see it, its true form, a nightmare spider from beyond space and time. It's described as being 15 feet tall, have these super thick legs, ruby eyes, jagged mandibles that's foaming. It's got body covered in coarse hair, has a big stinger equipped with poison, and it's got a big, full, pregnant belly, and we learned that it is a female. So, yeah, what did you think of seeing its true form? Did you ever think we were going to see its true form?
See, I thought we already kind of did see its true form. I thought that the, like, amorphous, like, blob or wax,
the melting
face, I thought that was it. I thought it was just kind of like, it didn't have a shape. It was just this entity that was like, could take whatever shape it needed to. I didn't think that there was actually going to be like a spider, which is, I mean, it's not disappointing.
What did you think of the spider?
It's not disappointing. Like, I thought that if it had a form, I'd be disappointed by it, and I wasn't. So that's a good thing. I mean, it's like the creepiest, stingiest mandible spider ever. So
yeah, huge, gross spider. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I thought it was cool. I just didn't expect it to be a spider all along, or for it to be a female.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I have to kind of remember the first time I read this book. Because this time, obviously, I knew that. I remembered that it was a spider. I think I did feel a little bit of, like, I don't know, like a relief almost when it's like, oh, it's a spider. I know what those look like. Like I've seen those in, video games and whatever, a number of things. I know what they're, fire does particularly good damage to spiders, not necessarily true for this one, but still, like, it makes it, you put a face to it and all of a sudden it's like a little bit less frightening. So, and I think there's a part that kind of talks about that later too. I think it's good. And I think this is a problem a lot of horror writers run into. I know I've heard writers talk about it, in that no matter how scary the monster is that you eventually show, it's never as scary as the monster you can't see. Like the thing you can't quite get a good look at. Like that's always more frightening.
Well, yeah.
And that's true for it as well.
I completely agree. And like relating that to film, I always would rather them not reveal the creature. Like, I know that a lot of people, it puts a lot of asses in seats to reveal creepy creatures and stuff to try to freak
You
people out.
mean in the trailer?
No. In general, in the movie. Like, I like, if you watch like Alien, the original Alien, you don't see very much of the alien. You're never going to get a clean look at it until maybe the very end.
Yeah. I say eventually I feel like you have to, because a lot of people will probably be pissed.
Right.
If
but
you
but
never
if you
get a single good look at the monster.
I guess what I'm
yeah,
saying
I
is
agree.
like, if you run into a situation where you show the monster like 20 minutes into the movie and you show its full form, people aren't going to be that scared anymore because it's not the unknown. Whatever we imagine is going to be so much scarier than whatever you can put on screen or in a book, in my opinion. I guess with a book, it's a little bit better because you're still using your imagination to put the pieces together. But if it's something that's just the unknown, it's just more frightening.
Yeah. So, do you think we're going to see a giant spider version of Pennywise in the movie?
Yeah, I actually meant to ask you that. I think we should, because I think that it's a part of this story, and I think
I kind of hope we do too. I mean, I am a little bit. Part of me thinks they're going to stick with the clown the whole time, and it's just going to always be the clown.
See, but that's like that's the stereotypical thing of like, I don't know if people haven't read the novel. I don't know that they really realize that it's like there's other things at play other than just a creepy clown.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of hope that that we see different forms, and then we eventually see this big crazy spider. I'd be fine if like the spider had like a clownish looking head on it or something, so that it still had that kind of consistency. But I do want to see like different forms.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it would be. I think they need to lean into the weird stuff, and I have heard that Stephen King enjoyed the film, so hopefully...
Yeah, it's been getting great reviews.
We can talk about that more at the end. He might just be saying it to try to promote the movie, but I think that, and this is just another one of my opinions, is that if there's source material, you should try to stick as closely to that as you can, because most of the time, you're not really going to make it that much better, and even if you do, there's going to be those like loyal fans who are like, they should have kept it like the book, so...
I feel like that's a whole nother debate we could have, because I think there are like, I've come around to there being points to both sides, and it's interesting to me to hear you, the film guy, kind of taking the side of the author, because that's what authors like to feel like. They're like, if you're gonna doubt my book, just keep it just like I wrote it.
Well, it just worked. I mean, I get putting your spin. We'll talk about this more on the movie episode, but to put a pin in it, my opinion of it is just
okay. I feel like we're gonna have many opportunities to discuss this very thing on this podcast in general.
Yeah, I just am of the opinion that there's a reason why people were a fan of this source material. So do your best to adapt it, put your own spin on it, but stay true to what people want to see.
All right, so I did want to say the other thing. I do remember the spider thing, not that weird. It being pregnant that was disturbing, because you immediately get these implications of like, wait a minute, it has babies. Are the babies just like it? And it's got like all of these eggs, so it's like, are we about to have the birth of like 100 new Pennywises into the world? That's a pretty terrifying thought. So I think that disturbs me more than anything else in that part.
I didn't expect, like, I was surprised that it was female, and then when they said that it was pregnant, there's like so many other questions that popped up in my head, like, what is impregnating it? Is it just asexual? Is it just kind of creating these spawn?
Oh, so Ben, in this moment, he sees beyond it, he says, for a moment, and he sees something made of orange light, and then he thinks of it as the deadlight. And this is another mention of the deadlight, and at some point, I would like to put forth a theory that may be very weak and maybe easily torn apart, but I have some like theories about the deadlight myself, but I am really curious to hear what you think about it first.
Well, do you want to there's not many more mentions of it. Do you want to just get into it now?
Okay. Yeah, so I have this like kind of, in my second read through, I kept thinking about the deadlights as being like the souls that it has claimed throughout all of its murders. And maybe not just the souls it has claimed. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's so ancient, right? Like it's been amassing these throughout like all of time. And So to me, if it kills you, your soul doesn't go wherever it normally would. Instead, it kind of captures you and makes you part of who it is. And then that's how it's able to summon your essence to like frighten people with. Like that's how he can show Georgie to Bill, and that's how he can pull up Vic and Butch, and like it's like all the or Belch. All these, like if he kills you, like now he kind of owns your soul. And it, I keep calling it he, but it's because Pennywise is kind of a he. He, it, she, all the same thing. But yeah, it like can send these things out as like little apparitions, and I think that's also linked to like the balloons thing. Like essentially why it's always holding balloons and it talks about floating is the balloons are like representative of these souls that it's collected. Like each balloon is its own like soul, and so you know when he's saying you'll come down here and float too, like he's telling Georgie in that first scene, come down and join the Deadlights, essentially become part of me and become part of my amassed souls that make me up.
I like it. I think that's cool. I didn't even think anything like that. I just from what I like understood, I thought that it was like kind of just like its consciousness, right? Like it's like
well, it definitely makes it up
beyond its form. Yeah, beyond its form of the spider is its like ancient, like like consciousness. Like it's back behind that, and I could totally see that being something where it was like because it is feeding it. The reason that it's there, like it's not killing these people like unmotivated. It kind of like has a need to feed. Yeah. So maybe it has something to do with like amassing these souls is like its way of, you know.
Yeah, it was created Derry to be its own like hunting range too, right? Like it says, like its own game preserve essentially.
Yeah, I'm down with the theory. I like it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. As I was talking it through, I'm like, this makes sense to me. I like this theory. I hope that I don't know if it's true because like I don't know that we ever get confirmation, but I feel like the Deadlights are directly linked to the balloons, and then also the backup is the like spirits that it's able to essentially summon.
Well, I definitely see for some reason when you said it to me, I feel like I see the spirits more than the balloons. Like, what is it with why is it so closely tied to the balloons for you? The floating.
So it's when he like invites Georgie to come float, and he says that you know, I've got all these kids, and he names the kids he's got down here, and we all float. And so when he's saying they all float, he's comparing them to balloons. And so if he collects souls, and he talks about the souls as floating like balloons, then you could make the leap that the balloons are therefore the souls that he collects. And I'm not saying like every time we see a balloon it is a soul or something, but maybe the way he like that's why he's always holding them, and that's his thing with these balloons. I don't know.
Yeah, it's cool.
Like I said, half-formed theory, but
I like it. Yeah, I will say that like the word float before this book, and it just meant like it just didn't seem very meaningful to me. Like it was just one of those words. It's just like people don't say it that often. Like you'll say it about like very specific things like balloons, and then now it just has a whole new context. Like every time I hear the word float now, whether it's like in the water or whatever it is, I'm just gonna think of like floating with Pennywise, floating with it.
Yeah. That's good, man. That's every writer's dream to be able to affect the zeitgeist like that. All right, so let's get back to it. 1958, they also see the spider, and so both of these showdowns are kind of happening simultaneously. And the children see half-eaten bodies hanging up in the web around this room. And Bill steps forward. Ben sees the Deadlights again, and we see that also the Deadlights also are like kind of in its eyes, giving it this orange glow of like corpse lights, which I've seen in the trailer. They definitely give him have like orange glowing eyes, which I think is pretty cool. And then Bill initiates the Ritual of Chud. And you were right, it is like a psychic biting onto the tongue thing, not like a physical thing. And they essentially latch onto each other, and Bill gets thrown into the dark, and he can see the cosmos. And it's this whole, like, I was thinking of like the scene from Doctor Strange recently, where he's like flying through and he's having all these visions, right? it was like I was thinking of that. Like he's outside of time and space, and he's in the cosmos, and he has to like say the chant to kind of like get control of himself and fight against it. And then he's flying past and he sees the great turtle, and he notices that he feels that it's older than it. He sees that it has kind eyes, and the turtle speaks to him, and it says, I had a bellyache, so it made the universe because of that, essentially. And he flies past the turtle, but the turtle's so big that it's just like it takes him forever to get past its body. And the turtle tells him of another that he says is perhaps the creator of the turtle. But this other only watches, doesn't interact. Then as Bill reaches the turtle's back legs, as he's hurtling through space and time, the turtle basically tells him he needs to help himself, and that the turtle can't help him. He has to help himself. And it basically says, chant. And then it even says, and what I thought was a really funny line, it says, once you get into cosmological shit like this, you have to throw away the manual. Direct quote from the turtle.
I was going to mention that if you didn't. I loved it, because it was like, I love the turtle. Like, just because of that and the stuff that he says, he talks about how he like apologizes for making the universe. Like, he's like, I'm sorry. He's
sorry,
like,
I had a bellyache.
He's like, don't blame me. He's like, it's not my fault. I'm sorry. I just had a bellyache and I threw up the universe. And then at the end when he's like, come on, man. He's like, once you get into this shit, he's like, there's no manual for it. Just figure it out.
It starts taunting Bill again, telling Bill that he's going to live inside of it, inside the deadlights. Bill has this thought that when it is out in this other plane, it is unkillable. But when it's on Earth and it's physical, it's bound to the form. And then he kind of realizes that so it can be killed when it's in its physical form. And so he begins to chant, and he chants in his father's voice, our favorite chant. And he imagines himself biting into the tongue, and he starts believing. He has to believe in like all this stuff, and basically everything he's doing is like really hurting it, and eventually it kind of flies back into reality. And the turtle tells him as he's going, like, make sure you finish it off. And then he slams back into his body, and the web begins to fall apart, and it basically like shuffles away like in like massive pain and is super wounded, and they may be going to die. They're not sure. And Bill says, we got to make sure. But, they can't, essentially. And they end up having to run away because everything's kind of collapsing. And they know it might not be dead, but they feel like they just have to hope that it's gonna like at least be defeated for many, like 1,000 years or something.
So something that I was going to say is the tongue, the like biting each other's tongue thing isn't literal, because it's it's like a psychic link, but then at the same time within the psychic link they do end up biting each other's tongues. Like he's like like Bill has his teeth around its tongue, so it's like kind of
it's like happening. It's unclear if it's like really happening or not.
I was surprised that it ended up kind of even happening though, because I thought it was like going to be like completely like kind of metaphorical.
Well, we didn't really get like riddles and jokes though, so that part of it didn't really come true.
Right. Yeah. I it did.
Although we got something kind of like we got a lot of chanting and like talking and stuff, but not specifically riddles and jokes. I mean,
Richie in a little while does start like making fun of it, kind of.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so that's similarly back in 1985 now the Bill initiates the ritual again. And this time when he gets to the other side, it tells him that the turtle has died. And it seems to be true. It seems to be the turtle has died in the intervening time. Basically, it throws him, and he tries to grab its tongue but misses his grip. And, it's like this oh shit moment of what now? What did you think about the turtle being dead?
I don't think I ever really bought the fact that the turtle was dead. Because it's like...
You think maybe it was lying?
Yeah, I think it was lying. I think it was like... Yeah, I don't know that I ever really bought it. and we don't ever really get confirmation that it wasn't.
We
dead,
don't.
Right?
At one point, he's flying. Like Richie's flying, and he says he sees the turtle briefly, but it doesn't say he sees the turtle's body or that the turtle's dead. He just says he sees the turtle. When maybe he sees it alive. I don't know.
When Bill sees it, he sees it like it's in its shell. He can't see it, but it's like he sees this shell, right? There's a part, I think, when he's flying back in a little bit.
Oh, maybe. Man, this whole part is so disorienting.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard. Like, I remember the first time I read this, I was way more disoriented. Like, the second time, I was, like, trying to parse it so that I could talk about it on a podcast. And still, I find that I struggle to understand what happened in this kind of other place.
I think there's, like, something to be said for the turtle being dead. Maybe it's, like, their childhood had ended at that point, and it's like once you're not a kid anymore, you can't really invoke Chud anymore. Like it's kind of like something that you do when you're a kid, and then he's kind of like lost to you. That's why the adults are so affected by it or something. I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said for that. But
yeah, whereas I feel like you've convinced me that it was lying and that the turtle's actually alive. So I don't know. It doesn't say that it killed the turtle. It just says that the turtle died.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. That's really weird. That's really odd. I don't know. Anyway, so basically, Richie catches on that something's going really wrong with Bill and that he's losing. And Beverly starts screaming that something's wrong too. She notices that too. It said that Bill's face is like stretching, and blood starts spurting from his nose. And then it brings up its stinger like it's gonna like kill him. Richie charges and starts using his Irish cop voice, which is his like go-to thing that hurts it. And sure enough, the voice seems to like really affect it. And then he mentally grabs on to the tongue and basically initiates a separate ritual. And Richie kind of comes to the rescue here. And he gets whacked out of his body into the darkness, just like Bill was. And he feels like a human yo-yo, he says. And he starts laughing because he thinks the whole thing is like absurdly funny. There's a lot of like Richie laughing at absurd things. And the laughter and the voice he's using kind of gives him a strength and seems to hurt it a lot. And then, yeah, we get it saying that Bill's in the deadlights now. Richie sees a barrier and he blasts into the barrier, or he's like hitting the barrier, and then he grabs Bill's hand. It's very confusing. And feel free to jump in if you remember it better than me.
It's all like, it's super hard to describe, like you're saying. So I thought it was seeing Richie like run forward in like kind of attacking this spider when his friend is being attacked, when Bill is like about to be stung, kind of reminded me of the scene. It's a book and a film, but in Lord of the Rings, when I guess it'd be Return of the King, when Frodo is wrapped up by Shelob or Shelob.
Yeah.
And Samwise comes up with the glowing like elven light thing, and it kind of reminded me, like I just imagined that happening. Like Richie like ran up to save him from a spider that was about to sting him, and then like jumped into the fight and like mentally tongue bit him. Yeah.
I mean, Richie really stepping up here, and so he grabs Bill's hand and pulls him basically through the darkness, and it says that they see the turtle, but it doesn't say whether or not the turtle's dead. So again, another moment of maybe not, and then they begin to lose their grip, and they're both gonna basically lose now. This is when we come back to Eddie, and Eddie sees that the spider is badly hurt, and he thinks like, someone needs to do something now here, and he runs forward with his aspirator, shouting, and he leaps up and he like starts triggering his aspirator onto it, and he sprays it in the eye, which it affects it like acid, like melting its eye. And then he basically like goes to like spray it again, and it opens its mouth, and he like thrusts his hand into its mouth, and he triggers it like deep in its gullet, and then the jaws just close down on his arm and rip it off, and Eddie like collapses, like bleeding out essentially. And then I'll just get this real quick. Bev comes up, she's crying, trying to staunch the blood, and then Richie comes over because he's kind of ended it now, and he says, don't call me Eds, and then he dies. Well, What did you think of Eddie dying?
It wasn't one that I really thought would die. I didn't really think that Eddie was going to.
So it surprised you. I don't think you. I don't remember if you listed him on your death prediction. I don't think you did.
I think I did, and I said that I could see him dying, but I didn't think he would. I think I said.
Shows what I remember.
I think I said that Ben was gonna. I thought that Ben might die.
Yeah.
But I'd be upset if he was, and then Eddie could die, and then I thought when Mike got stabbed in the leg, I was like, damn, I was wrong about Mike. But spoilers, Mike kind of makes it. He pulls through.
Yeah, he makes it.
So yeah, like I didn't expect Eddie to die. There's like some unresolved stuff that kind of went on in his personal life. But I mean, that's going to happen because that's like kind of true to life. Like when people die, it's not like they got to do necessarily everything they wanted to do. So.
Exactly. It cuts off. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, I remember it was sad too. And I really like the way, like he has an unfinished thought is when he dies. Like he dies in the middle of a sentence essentially. And I liked that because like you said, it's just like how he had this unfinished business and it felt like he had more to do and it just gets cut off. Which I think is very true to life. So next we get another macro view of Derry, and we see the storm has like really kicked up and is now knocking over trees, and the clock tower chimes 13 times and then gets struck by lightning. And we hear about a janitor who sees all the taps open up and spill out beer, and then the beer turns into blood, and then the kegs start exploding, and then oh, this was interesting. An old man like sits up and he starts speaking with Richie's Irish cop voice, and then he has a heart attack and dies. And it's another moment of like something like that's going. I guess it's because it's going on in the macroverse. It like is able to affect the real world in this way. I don't know. What did you make of that?
I think this is confirmation that Richie is the turtle. Right? Like Richie's voices have affected it and the turtle so much that Richie has become a god and he can make people speak in tongues in his specific accents and then give them heart attacks.
All right, you might be alone on that theory, but sounds interesting.
No, but honestly, it's pretty crazy. I think it definitely has something to do with the fact that Richie was in the macroverse, and he was kind of like. Did he use that accent in the macroverse? Do you remember?
Yeah, he did. That was how he was like combating it. Like the whole time he's shouting in his cop voice, and I think literally something he said is what comes out of this old man's mouth.
Right.
Before he.
So yeah, I think it's just like showing that like the macroverse is so powerful and it like has so much of an effect over our world.
Yeah, and especially specifically Derry, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then like the mall starts to explode and a bank explodes, and then a doctor gets his head cut off by a manhole that comes flying out. And it's like this like black humor moment, really. That's why I'm like giggling. He gets his head cut off, and then like his body keeps walking for like 3 steps before it falls over.
I think King had these like he just had these little snapshots of like weird deaths that he wanted to happen, and he's like, let's just have this like apocalyptic thing happening.
Yeah, so then we jump back to 1958, and it is now after this confrontation, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to get out. And think about how it's wounded, and they maybe killed it. This is what I was talking about earlier. So he has this line where he says like he feels like now that he's seen it, he can handle it. Like he feels like any form can be dealt with, except for maybe the deadlights. He does say, but he also thinks about how like. I don't know, like it's interesting because it goes back to what we were talking about, how like before something has a form, it's like scarier and like you can't deal with it. So we get the start of the controversial scene here. Let's wait until we get into the meat of it. But basically, Bev starts undressing for some reason, and all the boys are like, "What the hell's going on?" And she says she knows something that can bring them together. All right, back in 1985. We got Eddie, who's laying there dying, or dead, rather. And then they decide they're not going to let it escape this time. The wed drifts down, and Bill sees Audra, and he's kind of screaming, but Richie is able to snap him out of it, and they go chasing after it. Ben comes to, and on their way, they find the trail of eggs. And because it's like spilling its eggs now that it's been defeated. And Ben decides he's gonna like wait and like take care of these eggs while the other two go on. And so it starts breaking the eggs, and like these little spiders the size of rats come out, and he can hear them talking, or not talking, but like mewling, and it's in his mind. So they're like these little psychic rats, spider rats. And so to me, this says like these are like they're going to grow into full blown like Pennywises essentially when they grow up. So yeah, I don't know. Is that what you got from it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that if those little rat spiders were allowed to live, they would definitely become full-grown Pennywises. Which is really scary to think, because then it basically just take over the world. And
yeah, because they'd probably all want their own towns, right? So they just spread out all over the world.
Yeah.
Oh, so there's this thing called the It Lives ending, which is like a cliched like horror movie ending. Did you think we were going to get that here, and we were going to have a moment at the end where there was going to be one egg like tucked away in a corner that they all missed?
So I mean, it was
this feels like it was kind of setting up that kind of ending for me.
It was written, I don't know what like the tropes were like, what like, you know, it was a different time in like 1986. Yeah. So like if it had happened,
yeah, mid 80s.
If it had happened, I may have been lenient with it and been like, oh, I mean, I guess it's, you know, it may have been ahead of the curve kind of thing. But I'm really glad that he didn't do that, because
I'm glad he didn't do it too. It would have felt cheap to me.
Yeah.
But I feel like it, like if you decided he wanted to do it too or something, like he could, because all he has to say is that Ben didn't find one of them. Yeah. You know, we didn't need to hear about it.
Or that instead of Richie being the turtle, he's really Pennywise.
Well, that explains the racist voices, right?
Yeah.
All right. We get like a final kind of it section here where it can sense the adults coming after it, killing its unborn. It's like freaking out, and it says it basically has nothing else it can do but turn and fight. So it turns and, you know, to fight. And then we kind of go back over to Beverly in 1985. She sees Audra fall. The room goes dark, and she begins to think about how she was each of their first love. And then she starts doing this thing where she starts thinking about the birds. And then she thinks about Eddie, who she's cradling in her arms. And then we get into the problematic scene. I should just say controversial scene. Because if you do a quick search on the internet for people talking about this, it's all over the place. And there's, you know, people in forums kind of going back and forth. But yeah, I'll get into it. I'm just going to do a brief description of it. Essentially, Bev decides she knows about this thing that her father basically told her about, and it's this really powerful act, and she thinks that it can bring them all together and like kind of bind them together. And I think that's the key really here, is that this is her way of bringing them as close together as they could possibly be. And so she basically has each one of them come one at a time and have sex with her, and she thinks about how like other children think about sex as this monster called It, which I thought was a really interesting comparison to this book. You know, like the book is about a monster called It, and she thinks of like children thinking of sex as a monster called It, this unnameable monster. And before that, I hadn't made that connection, but you know, I thought that was interesting. And Eddie comes first, and then, you know, several, you know, he kind of glosses over a few of it. But I will say, like, it's not written in like a super sexualized way. It's written as more of this like ritual. And then Ben is second to last, and she like has like the most pleasure with him. And then Bill is the final one. And then at the end of it, they like think about how they're never going to speak of it again. And all of a sudden, Eddie like knows where to go, and he's like can figure out how to get them out. And Richie makes a joke, and they all kind of like immediately seems like they're starting to forget about it. So, how shocked were you, and how much did you be like, what the fuck did we read this book first, Luke? I wasn't ready for this. Did you have any of these thoughts? Like, what did you think when you read this scene?
So, I mean, it's weird, right? It's a weird scene. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
Do I think that it needs to be in the book? No, I don't think so. But do I think that was I like offended by it personally? I wasn't. I think there's a little bit of like a shock factor value in it. There's like some it's weird because like it's not like he makes like good points for it, but it's like it's like they're doing it like you said before. It's not like a sexual way. It's like this thing where they don't really understand what they're doing. Like I don't think they realize in the context of what they're doing. They kind of just think it's like this act. I think that it was a way to kind of show this like ending of innocence too. Like I think that it was like them doing this like unspeakable act that even like adults wouldn't think to do. And it's showing that like they're so naive, and yet having done that, they're now, I don't know, they have experience. I don't know. It's
I think you're actually tapping into something that King intends. I was able to find a quote about this from King himself. I guess I'll read it now and then we can talk about it more.
Okay.
But this is what King said about it when asked. I wasn't really thinking of the sexual aspect of it. The book dealt with childhood and adulthood, 1958, and grown-ups. The grown-ups don't remember their childhood. None of us remember what we did as children. We think we do, but we don't remember it as it really happened. Intuitively, the losers knew they had to be together again. The sexual act connected childhood and adulthood. It's another version of the glass tunnel that connects the children's library to the adult library. Times have changed since I wrote that scene. There is now more sensitivity to those issues. That last sentence is really interesting to me, but it seems like he really means it as this connection between their childhood and their adult selves, and they do this adult act. But also they need to come together because they know they're going to have to come back. And I think that was what it, in the second time, because I think the first time I read it, I was a lot like you. I was like, this feels super extraneous and like doesn't need to be in the book, and I don't know why it's here other than shock value. I feel like it kind of played better for me the second time. Like it felt more like it fit in the book in a weird way. And I think it's because I was on the lookout more. You know what I mean? And like when I read those other sections with Bev, and really about like how her whole character arc has been about her not having her own like agency sexually, and this is a moment of her kind of like taking control of it and using it to like bind their group together. That doesn't mean I don't think there's not maybe some problematic things there. Like if you want to talk about gender, obviously it's, she's the only girl, and it's like the fact that the only girl has to do something sexual to like be a part, like to end up being like the thing that brings this group together. There's like some weird kind of misogynistic, because it's a male writer imagining it this way. Like there's some like potentially problematic things in there, and I'm not going to pretend like there's not. But I don't know. Anything else you want to say? I have more thoughts, but I want to let you talk.
I just think that for me, what it was more than anything was they were lost in the tunnels, and that's what he jumped to. Like we went from being lost in the tunnels to Bev having the presence of mind to think like, if they all have sex with me, it'll help the situation in some way. I know that they were freaking out, and it was like a way for them to like focus on something different that wasn't them freaking out about being lost in the tunnels. And like in that way, they were so shocked, and so like they were going through this moment in their lives that would be so formative for them. I guess if they remembered it, they didn't remember it necessarily, but it was still probably like subconsciously like formative for them. I get that was kind of the reasoning. Like she was like trying to like draw them away from what was going on, the things that were going on in that situation, to clear heads and that kind of thing. But I just don't think that warranted, that them being lost warranted this. And I don't know, like you say, I think it is just a bit extreme.
So one thing that I was thinking about with this too is it's reminiscent of when you hear about like pagan rituals with like people like pagan orgies and stuff. I don't know how realistic that is, but you hear about that, right? As like a thing. And it reminds me of that too. Like there's, in our culture throughout time, there's always been this like power to sexuality and especially people's like virginity. And when we talk about like power and belief, if all of our society believes there's power in people losing their virginity, and there's something there, right? The fact that they all lose their virginity to each other, essentially, right? Like that does kind of bind them in a way that no other act could really do. I mean, like the cutting of the hands is one thing, but like ultimately this is like a way more stark way of doing it. I don't know. Like it's like I said, like I don't know that I've convinced myself that it's necessarily a good scene that needed to be in there, but I feel like I have come around on it more.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't feel as completely like tacked on and just like shock value. Because that's kind of how I read it the first time. I was like, man, he's just really going for full shock value here, and he wanted to do something that he didn't think anyone was, you know what I mean? Like it felt like he was just being like, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. I'm going to write a crazy sex scene in this book with a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
But in the second read, like, I don't know, it played better for me.
I was going to say, like, I don't... So, do I think that it had to be in the book for the book to be a whole, you know...
Well, I mean, I don't think... I think it's safe to say this isn't going to be in the movie. So I think the story can go without it. There can be ways to go without it. But is the book better for having it?
That's what I was kind of going to get at. I don't... Ultimately, my thoughts on it are, if I needed to just boil it down to a couple of things, are, do I think that it needed to be in the book? No, I don't think it needed to be in the book. Do I want it out of the book? I don't think that I necessarily want it out of the book, because it's like I want the full vision of like what King was trying to get done here. And like with all of the things that we've said that are like there's things that are potentially problematic. There's reasons why it's just weird kind of. I think that, I don't know, it's just such a touchy subject. I don't think it needs to come out. It doesn't I understand if it offends people, and that's warranted. It doesn't offend me personally. So all in all, like I think it is in the book for a reason, is what I'm trying to get at.
All right, so a couple more things I'm going to say about it, and then we can move on. And unless you want to react to them. I have heard another quote from King, although I wasn't able to find it for the direct quote. But essentially, it was him saying that when someone asked him about this, he says the kids will know why it's in there, which is kind of weird because it's also like him talking about like kids reading his book. But like, this to me plays into what we've been talking about through this whole podcast, this whole series of episodes. We've talked about the secret lives of children, right? And we've talked about, especially with like the Patrick Hockstetter moment with him and Henry. And I think there is these sexual things that go on with children that people forget about because you deeply suppress them. Not saying that everybody has something, but like a lot of people do. And then you like repress them and you hide them, and maybe you don't even remember them. And that's kind of King's point. And so in his book, that event for all of those characters, because they're in this special group with this special bond, like this is what it is for them. And that, you know, this secret thing that they did, that like power that it has, is something that binds them together in a way that like other things can't like hold a candle to, really, I guess. Does that make any sense? Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely, I think that you're right on there. Like, I think that it's such an important thing in our society, and it's the only thing, nothing else is going to have that effect, right? So he took the thing that would have the greatest effect when written on the page, and kind of, like you say, like all in all, an author or a storyteller is trying to be as true to life as possible. And if you're trying to say that these types of things don't happen, you're kidding yourself. So I don't think that, because he's not doing it in a distasteful way. He's not trying to do it in like pure shock value, in my opinion. So I think that like in trying to be true to what his vision of this book would be, and trying to stick closely to, like you're saying, the things that happen between kids that people tend to suppress. Like, he's stuck with his guns, and he has a scene that's controversial for a reason, but at the end of the day, I think it deserves to be in the book. Okay. I think we've said enough. I'm sure us two dudes on a podcast talking about women's issues, I think it's safe to say we haven't solved anything here. But this is how we feel about it. Certainly don't want to say that we are some sort of authority and that we have settled any sort of debate on this thing. we'll give the email and stuff later. But if you end up having feedback about this, if you want to engage with us with your opinion on it, please send that in, and we might not be able to read the whole thing depending on how long it is, but we can definitely talk about it on like the movie episode or just in the future. So we welcome that. Okay, so next up we get another Derry macro chapter, and we see the winds picking up, the water's rising, and we see this like high guy watches the standpipe fall down, and he says to himself, Steven Spielberg, eat your heart out, because he thinks it's like special effects. And he sees this like flood water crash through the barrens and into town, sweeping away houses, and this standpipe from before is just like rolling through town in this big kind of apocalyptic moment. We get the kind of this final confrontation, and we get it coming at Bill and Richie, and it's interesting because it's like begging almost for its life, and it says just let it's like asking them to just let it go, and it offers Bill to have Audra back, says he can give her her mind back. It says that it can give them like super long lives and essentially make them gods among men. All it has to do is touch them, and they'll live for like 500 years. And it kind of is trying to like barter, but they're not having any of it. And they start tearing into it with their bare hands and like punching it and kicking it. And Bill literally like charges into its body, rips it apart, gets inside, and finds its heart and holds its heart between his hands and then crushes it. So pretty badass way to kill a giant spider, I would say.
I kind of figured that Bill would ultimately be the one to fully kill it, just because it was always kind of his. It seemed like it was always kind of his story to tell. He's kind of the leader, and with what happened to Georgie being the beginning of it a while ago. I thought it was cool. I thought it was I honestly, getting into this book, I thought kind of that there was definitely a supernatural element to the clown and that kind of thing, but I didn't realize that it was going to be this like, I don't know, this got pretty epic. Like this became like this final battle like is up there with like a lot of like finales, like the crescendo or the climax of the story. Like this is up there for me with a lot of my favorite books. Like I think it was a great,
really,
yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like I thought that it just paid off so well. Like it was just all paid off all throughout. It was fun to read. It was relatable. It was, I don't know. It just and I really enjoy those coming of age stories like this.
I've heard this book described as the Moby Dick of horror novels, which I thought was a pretty funny comparison.
Something that I will say is that I don't necessarily think that it's like the scariest thing I've ever read. I think I enjoy it for those horror elements, and I like a lot of it, but it's not necessarily a scary book. It's got scary moments. I like it for how well written it is, and I like it for the genre, like the genre of horror. But I don't. Yeah. There weren't there were a few times that stand out, but there weren't like scary moments as much as disturbing moments.
I do think this will always affect people more strongly if you have an intense fear of clowns. And like I know people who do like see a clown and are like, "Oh fuck no, I'm not even going to be around that clown right now." I am not that person. Like I've always been like, I don't really particularly love clowns, but they don't really frighten me. I don't know.
I wonder if those people would even attempt to read this book though.
I think some people do. Well, because like some people who are horror fans will actively seek out things that scare them, and yeah, I would think there probably are people who are deeply afraid of clowns and read this book, for sure.
Good for them. I wish that there was something that I feared like that. Like I wish there was one thing just so that I could push myself in that way. You know what I mean? Like an adrenaline junkie, like playing it, like fighting my fears, like these people did, like Bill and Richie and all them.
All right, so we get another macro chapter here. We see Derry start to collapse, and all the underground sections are like falling in. We see the statue of Paul Bunyan explode, and all these buildings start sinking in to the ground, and water's kind of churning, and then the Kundusky overflows its banks. And then back in the tunnels, Bill's carrying Richie, and they find Ben. And Richie, it seemed like there was like kind of a fake out where it looked like maybe Richie was dead. I don't know. Did you buy it? Did you think he was actually dead?
I thought there was a potential that he could be dead. When bought his less than I bought like Mike's. I'll say that. Like I was like, oh, Mike might die here, but I thought there was a potential that he could die. I wasn't like the whole time. I wasn't like, no, he's not dead.
Okay, yeah, I mean, so we find out he was just kind of unconscious and he's fine. And they find Bev next. Bill finds Audra's body and finds out that she is alive but unresponsive. And they kind of have to do this, like they can't carry everybody out, and so they decide to leave Eddie in its lair. And then they take Audra and they go out through the door. Real quick, like how did you feel about them leaving Eddie's body back behind there? Were you like, oh, he's dead, so it doesn't matter, or did it feel like an injustice?
I mean, it sucks. It's definitely. I don't think they would have left him if they could have helped it. If it was me personally, like if I die, just leave my body, dude. I don't care. You know what I mean? Like that's how I feel about it. Like so, I would hope that Eddie would feel the same. But I mean, it definitely sucked that he went out to save all of them, and then they had to leave his body behind.
Yeah, I think I would have been fine with it. Like, I mean, ultimately, it is what happened, and I'm fine with it for that reason. But I think what makes it really sad is what we get later with all the forgetting that happens. And I want to talk about that more later. But the idea that he's left behind and then he's forgotten is what I think makes it really sad.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely sad.
Yeah, so the library breaks apart its tunnel, snapping. And it's interesting now, having read that Stephen King quote, because I think that glass tunnel between the adult library and the children's library is like it's like a metaphorical like nexus for this book, right? And then it breaks apart at the end.
I will say that until you brought that up with that quote, I didn't make the connection. Like I understand, I didn't even make I knew that it was an important facet of the book, and they kept bringing it up, but I didn't even make the connection that it was like literally, like not. I guess it's not literally, but metaphorically, it's their childhood. It's the merge. It's like the path
it's the connection between the two.
Childhood and the adulthood. Yeah, I didn't even make the connection.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I don't know. I like that kind of. That's I think a effective metaphor in that you don't necessarily know about it. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't so obvious, because like a really obvious metaphor can almost be painful. It's like, oh man, I didn't. Yeah, I agree. It didn't like hit me over the head or anything. It wasn't until I read that King quote that I even thought about it. So yeah, they take turns carrying Audra. They get out by basically using their instinct, and they come out through a cave in and escape. A bunch of people are watching them as they escape from the town. The rain stops. The sun peeks out. And the townsfolk begin to survey the damage, and Derry vows to rebuild. But as they vow to rebuild, like the crater kind of continues to grow. Then we get a scene of they put Audra in an ambulance, and then the group's all walking together back to the hotel. They look at their palms, and they see that the scars are now gone. And then at the last moment, Bev sees a reflection in the glass that shows Eddie and Stan walking with them as they're on their way into the hotel. So 1958, we get the next scene of the children coming out of the pipe as well, and then we get the kind of infamous scene where they cut their palms. They form a circle, and Stan goes around with a glass and cuts all of their palms. And to me, this feels almost a little bit redundant because I've convinced myself that other scene is essentially more important than this in the binding of them. But this probably is all you need, and ultimately you're right. Like maybe this is all you really need, and you don't need that other scene. But yeah, they all kind of cut their hands, hold and clasp hands, and create this circle of power and vow to come again, because if it isn't dead, they will come back. And they realize that this is the last time all 7 of them are ever together in one spot again, which we know to be true because Stan dies later. So we move into the final interlude, and it's Mike talking about how Bill comes to him in the hospital, and has told him that Audra's catatonic, and Mike essentially offers for Bill to stay at like a place he has and take care of her for a little while. Richie, we find out, has flown back, and we also hear that Ben and Beverly kind of go back together, like maybe they're like an item now. And so it seems like even though stuff has been happening with her and Bill, it seems like maybe her and Ben are ultimately going to stay together after this.
I mean, as they should, because that's always I felt like that was always the natural progression of these characters. I don't know that, like, I felt like a lot of the Bill a lot of the Bill Bev stuff was kind of, I don't know how I felt about it all.
If you felt like this was the more natural or the more
I understand like the
poetic,
the drama that it adds, like by having the love triangle and that kind of thing, but it to me could have not even been there, and Bill still would have been as important, and Bev would have had a big role still.
It's a bit of a tangent, but I think to myself, like, how much of this could have been changed, and a lot of these problems may be lessened if, like, say, Eddie had been a second girl in the group.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, that whole dynamic changes, you know?
Definitely.
Like, a lot of the problem was with Bev being the only girl, and so she was super sexualized, and it was like they were all in love with her all the time. And as an adult, they all thought she was super hot, and they were all kind of like, I don't know. I think some of it is a little bit.
I mean, that's definitely
a little bit weird.
That's definitely the part that doesn't hold up. Like, that was it was it shows its age there, and that's just like such a, I don't know.
Yeah.
I agree.
In some ways, it's before its time, but then, like, that does feel like a very... Because, I mean, you think about 1985, like, that's mid-'80s. That's not a... Like, you know, there's a lot of growing that society is about to go through in the next 30 years that it hasn't.
I think a lot would have been added, like you're saying, but just adding one more girl.
Okay, so next up, we get Mike talking to Richie on the phone, and it's clear that Richie is, like, forgetting already, and Mike can feel himself forgetting. And, they can't remember Stan Uris's last name. Richie can't remember what happened to Bill's wife, and he like says, you know, tell Bill to tell his wife hello. Like, he can't even remember that Audra's, you know, catatonic. And then we move into the epilogue, and we know that the physical names and addresses are fading from Mike's, like, address book, and he knows soon like all memory of it will be utterly gone. And he can only remember Bill because Bill's still in Derry with him. And he knows that eventually he'll forget Bill too. And he talks to Bill, like, on the phone, and Bill tells him that he's going to try something crazy. And then we get Bill looking at himself in the mirror and thinking about how old he looks. And then he decides, okay, I'm going to take Audra, who's catatonic at this point, and he's going to put her on the back of Silver. And this is him using Silver that he got in that section way long time ago, and then, like, didn't have any payoff until this final moment, right? And there's this scene is interspersed with these thoughts about, like, a dream he has about leaving Derry. That's kind of vague and it's kind of poetic, but I'm going to focus on what happens with Audra. So he gets Audra onto his bike, and as he's riding Silver, he starts, you know, doing his hi-ho Silver routine. And kind of like writing to, you know, writing to escape the devil. And there's a lot of this, like, the freedom and exhilaration of being a kid on the back of a bike, and, like, the power that's in that seems to, like, somehow bring Audra back to her body and, like, restore her consciousness. And she literally wakes up and, like, grabs onto him, and all of a sudden she, like, can't remember anything that happened after she got off the plane in Bangor. And Bill rides through town. His stutter's gone. He thinks about this dream, and he thinks about how it's good to be a child, but it's also good to be a grown-up. And there's this, you talk about, like, the whole thing being a wheel, which makes me think of, like, True Detective, you know, obviously many years later. Also talking about, like, time being a flat circle, and, like, to me this was similar about how, like, it all exists. Like, your past and your present, like, coexist with each other. And that seems to be, like, kind of the main thing about this whole book, right? Yeah, he thinks about his childhood, and he can almost remember that they had, like, been through something crazy, but ultimately he can't. And I don't know. To me, this is the end of the book, but I think that this loss of memory, to me, is really sad at the end here, because I just think about all the personal growth they've gone through, and how, like, maybe not Bill because of, I don't know, but maybe even Bill, like, all of them could potentially lose out on this personal growth again. And I'm really worried that, like, a lot of them are going to fall back into, like, old habits, and they won't even remember Eddie, who's dead. I don't know. What did you think about the ending here? Were you surprised by Audra coming back?
Yeah, I was surprised by Audra coming back, because I felt like there was certain consequences needed to, like, stay within each person's life for them to have any sort of growth. Like, I think it would have been weird to leave Bill in a situation where he did have a catatonic wife,
Yeah, it would have been a very different ending, right? It would have been pretty sad.
Yeah. I think it is sad. It's sad with the loss of memories, just because it makes you think about your own life and how like you have childhood memories that like shaped you into the person that you are now, and you don't remember them. And that's like the whole key behind this book. And coming to the end here, like it is a big factor here at the very, very end, in the fact that they're all going to forget all of these things happened. I think that it would have been nice had they gone back to where they like kind of remembered each other, because it was the reason that they didn't remember each other before. So like if they left and they forgot everything that happened, but they still remembered each other, it would feel better. But they don't remember anything, and they'll forget Eddie, which is a bummer.
Yeah, we don't get any of Bev and Ben together. But I remember feeling like I wonder if they can maybe remember more, because it's two of them together, you know?
I was just thinking about that.
But even that, like, I still feel like they're not going to remember. Like, it just seems like, I mean, with the fact that like the words are literally dissolving from like the literal page, like it's like some cosmic thing is ensuring that they're not going to remember this. And like the macroverse itself, like as soon as they got out of that room, they immediately start forgetting like what happened in the macroverse. So like all this stuff is just like maybe the human mind is not equipped to hold on to it. So like it can't. I don't know. It's also scary because it's like, I don't know, as someone who's gone through a situation where something happened that I don't remember, it can often feel like it's not real. Like it's like, because you have no memory of it, it feels like it didn't even happen to you, because memory is all you have. Like that is your life, is the things you remember. So the idea that like that something so important could have happened, and like they could literally have an entire friendship, and like people who died and all this stuff could happen, and then if you forget about it, it's like it never happened. Are you ready to call it for the book, at least?
That's it. We made it all the way through.
All the way through, man.
We do still have the film to go see, but
yes.
Beyond the film, that's it. That's all for it. And I mean, I really enjoyed reading this book, more than I thought I would, actually, and I was excited to read it, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised at how much I got out of it a second time through. And it never felt like boring or onerous to have to read it again. I don't know. I was able to get enough out of it, and reading it the way I was reading it for the podcast was a whole different experience too. So I feel like now I really, really have a deep understanding of this book in a way that I didn't have before. But man, I'm excited to see this movie. I got my ticket. I'm going to see it opening night, so I'm stoked.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. It looks a lot of good creative people involved. It looks like I think it's gonna stay fairly true to what Stephen King wrote in the novel, as much as they can.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm hearing great reviews.
Do you have any specific film predictions?
Obviously our controversial scene isn't going to be in there, but I think I am going to predict that they do show a spider at the end.
Okay. So if they show a spider, do you think that they show any sort of macroverse stuff?
Yeah, that I don't think they're going to do that.
So nothing.
It would be interesting. Are we going to get a scene literally like something out of Doctor Strange with like somebody flying through the macroverse and the turtle and all that?
I doubt it. I also doubt it. But like, how do you think that it's just going to be a turtle on the ground? Like, how do you think they address
I don't know,
the
man.
stuff?
I don't know if we're going to get any turtle stuff.
There'll be something. There'll be an Easter egg at the very least. But
maybe an Easter egg.
But there will. Yeah. I think that if they should definitely have like a little something. I don't think the macroverse thing is a little much for some people, but
I think I'm excited to talk about it. I know that we're running long on time here, so real quick, I wanted to announce. Or do you want to you announce it, or do you want me to?
Sure, yeah. So our second project will be starting here in the next 2 weeks, I believe. Sometime in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, something like that.
So we
might record in a week. Who knows?
We're gonna get on a more consistent schedule and start dropping on a certain day. Now that we've gotten to the point where we can see it as it releases. Our next project, drum roll please, is Blade Runner. So we're gonna go.
Yeah, the new Blade Runner and the old Blade Runner.
So
right,
yes,
both movies.
So we're gonna read the novel, which it's loosely based on. Yeah,
so the novel is very different than this novel. If you've never read it, it's called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. If you want to go ahead and get it, if you're wanting to read along with us. But be forewarned, it is like, don't expect Blade Runner novelized, because that's not what it is. It's like the novelization of Blade Runner, because Blade Runner is very loosely based off of this book. Now, I haven't read it, so I actually don't know the exact ins and outs of it. So it'll be interesting because it'll be both of us experiencing it for the first time. But it's a much shorter book than it. So we're hoping we can maybe get through it in like 2 episodes. And then we'll launch into the watch of the old original 80s Blade Runner. And then we'll go see Blade Runner 2049 when it's in the theater.
Yeah. Original Blade Runner 1982 is the final cut is one of my favorite films. So that's what we'll be watching, by the way, is the final cut.
Okay.
So
I'm excited about that because I barely remember that movie.
I love Blade Runner, and I am excited for the new one. Denis Villeneuve is the director, and he's directed some great films recently, like Arrival, Prisoners.
Yeah, I loved Arrival.
He's great.
Oh, Prisoners was good too. I didn't know he also did that one.
Yeah, he's awesome.
He
did another big one that I'm forgetting. Oh, Sicario. Yeah, Sicario.
Oh, I did not see that. Yeah. Okay. Well, our social media, we're on Twitter at Ink to Film. We're on Instagram, Ink to Film. We're on Facebook, so on and so forth. If you would like to send us feedback, which we would love to hear from you about that controversial scene, or if you want to get in your predictions for the movie, or if you hear this but you've already seen the movie and you want to fill us in on what you thought of the movie, any of that, send it to inktofilm@gmail.com.
We'd also like to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. He has a YouTube channel you can check out if you want any similar content to use for a project.
We also want to ask you guys to please rate and subscribe if you can, if you're willing, because that would really help us out. We want to grow this podcast, and every little bit helps. Your rating will help. I guarantee it.
Yeah, and then another thing is, if you like our podcast, show it to a friend. Pass it around. We're trying to break out there. We're trying to see if we can get we're looking for new people to engage with, and hopefully we'll hear from some new ones soon.
Yeah, and if you've been like sitting here waiting for us to do a non-horror horror thing, we got our new project coming up with a sci-fi romp, so look forward to that.
Yep, it'll be a much shorter project than it, and we're looking forward to it.
All right, and that's it for our coverage of the novel. Thanks for listening. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
All right, we'll see you for the movie.